Let me tell you what my deep research and basically vision is.
I hope there's Bigfoot. I don't think there is.
I'm not telling you nothing.
The aliens won't let it happen.
Happening now, breaking.
Bernie Sanders is angry.
Bears beats Battlestar Galactica.
What are the tips? Give me some tips on how to work with Wes Anderson.
Be ready to speak very fast and very clearly, because that's definitely one key thing.
I will only tell the truth.
Until you and 6 kids you barely know in wet bathing suits have surrounded 9 chimpanzees outside of a Wendy's. You probably really don't know yourself, okay?
Yep. And we back.
Hello and welcome. You're listening to your new favorite podcast and the best in political, sports, and paranormal news coverage. I'm your host, Wes Anderson, and this is In the Shed. This is episode 70, so whether you're back for more or finding us for the first time this week, hey, thanks for tuning in. It is early Friday, February the 23rd, and I'm in the shed in the backyard of my home in Alabama. Also, I can hang out with you tools and talk about the latest headlines, stories, and rumors in the world of politics, sports, and the paranormal. Bob Marley and the Wailers, so much trouble in the world. So much trouble in the world. The movie One Love is number 1 in theaters right now. On my list to see, although I haven't seen it yet, but I will. And I thought that song was an appropriate way to start our time together today. Good morning, my tools, my babies, my people. How are you on this illustrious Friday morning? Did you survive? Did you make it? Are you listening to me right now on your tiny cellular friend? Did you make it through the national cell phone outage of 2024? Yesterday, for hours, I had no cell service. I could not call my wife. I could not send out a text message. All I saw on my phone was SOS, which I thought stood for someone special, and I was thoroughly confused. Valentine's Day has passed. I thought I accidentally put my phone in airplane mode. I couldn't figure out what was going on. And I came home from my lunch break. I turned on the television, and it was all over the news. AT&T customers, some Verizon customers, others, millions of Americans all over the country with absolutely no cell phone service whatsoever. At that point, I began to wonder if this were not the beginning of Leave the World Behind. Did you see that movie on Netflix? It was about some type of coordinated cyber attack on our country. And I started to wonder if some things were not happening that I am completely unprepared for. Because, hey, I can defend myself and my family, and I can open a can of corn. But I can't really grow very much. At least I don't have very much growing right now in the way of food. And I'm out of bottles of water currently. I got some toilet paper in reserve. I'm limited on preparation is what I'm trying to say, okay? I told my wife, I said, what are the odds that AT&T and Verizon are just randomly having issues with 75% of their customers across the entire nation versus, hey, something's happening that probably shouldn't be happening and somebody's behind it. And then this morning, I'm driving, taking my kids to school to drop them off, and I hear on the radio, the FBI, Department of Homeland Security, and others are investigating yesterday's cell phone outage to determine whether it was routine or if it was some type of cyber attack. You don't say. You don't say. Y'all like to hate on me all the time for saying I'm a journalist. But it looks like I broke the story. I'm not saying. I'm just saying. But by late afternoon, early evening, I don't know when you got your service back, if you were affected. Some of my friends were not. Finally, I got my service back. And I was able to contact the world again. And we're all better off for it. Hallelujah. Amen. Let's play ball. Definitely weird, definitely strange, definitely odd. In all honesty, I don't know what to make of it, but it is something that I'm going to keep an eye on and that I have questions about. And I probably need to be a little bit more prepared for anything than I currently am. And I'm aware of it. Other weird things that have happened lately. It's been a couple weeks since we've done an episode of the show. I went on a small vacation with the family. The last episode I did was episode 69, which part of the title had the words, China disappears, Pfizer executive. Because during episode 69, I covered a story about a Pfizer executive who was disappeared by China. That's literally what happened. This man was a well-known English businessman who had lived in China since the 1970s. He was fluent in Mandarin. He had worked for a bunch of companies over there. He was very well known. And in 2018, he just disappeared. Finally, in 2024, China admits that he was arrested and that he was tried and convicted for espionage. Yeah, they're saying that he is, or was, a spy. And they have rejected any request by the man's family or the man's government to see any of the court proceedings, to see any of the paperwork, or anything to do with his charges, but they have made it public and made it known that he's been convicted of espionage and is serving a sentence for that. They disappeared this man in 2018. He had been a top executive for Pfizer. Some things happened in 2020 that China has not been, shall we say, forthcoming about when it comes to transparency and details and origins and data. And then now in 2024, they finally admit that this man has been held in jail and allege that he is a spy. Anyway, if you missed episode 69, I covered that story. That's why that was in the title of the episode. It's a real story. I am a journalist. You can look it up. And I'm always a little slow to put our podcast episodes up on YouTube. We don't have a very big following there. We're just getting started. We've got like 27 subscribers now. You can find us there at In the Shed with Wes Anderson 6670. But since it's audio only and we don't have a big following, I'm always a little bit behind getting my episodes up on our YouTube channel. But I finally got around to doing that. One of these days on vacation, episode 69, I uploaded it, and then I got a message from YouTube, and it said, "Hey, episode 69 of your show will not be available in certain parts of the world." Do you mean China, perhaps? I'm guessing that some part of the world may perhaps mean China. Did something about that title, a totally legitimate news story that I covered, but something about that title eliminated the possibility of our last episode being shown on YouTube in, quote, certain parts of the world. Weird. Definitely very weird. On a better note and a lighter note, took my 3-year-old son to karate. Yeah. The 3-year-old he's starting karate. It's not even really karate. It's whatever comes before karate for like the youngest kids, the class they have there at the dojo. I think it's called a dojo. Where they work on discipline and flexibility, and they learn how to do a couple of things in preparation for when they're old enough for real karate, okay? But I asked little man if he wants to go to karate, and he is pumped. I mean, he is hype. He's excited about it. He puts on his Spider-Man shirt. He's throwing punches in the living room. He's excited as can be. We load it up in the truck. We drive across town. We get there. I unbuckle him from his car seat. He gets out, steps into the parking lot, and freezes. And I'm like, "What's wrong, buddy? Aren't you excited about going in and doing karate?" And he says, "No, Daddy, I'm scared." And I'm like, "Buddy, why are you scared? You were so excited about this. What's going on?" And he says, "Who's gonna punch me?" My boy thought he was gonna have to fight somebody on day one. He watches a lot of superhero shows. He's really into Spider-Man and Ninja Turtles and Batman, and he was pumped to learn karate, but he thought he was going to have to show up swinging, and he wasn't ready to get punched. He wasn't about it. He was like, "Daddy, who gonna punch me?" But he had a good time. There were no punches thrown at him, really. No fighting had to be done. He just got to do some obstacle courses, learn how to do a push-up, hang out with some friends, and it was a good time. It was a good time. I'm going to be on another podcast, my second ever time as a guest on someone else's show on Monday. Today is Friday. This show comes out probably Saturday. And on Monday, I will appear on an episode of the Cerebral Chaos podcast with my guy Timothy Doty II. Doty was a guest on our show last year, and he is returning the favor. He's kind enough to have me on his show, and that should be out on Monday. If you want to check it out anywhere you get your podcast, support me by listening, support him. He does a great job. He has a fun show, and he's a good person. All right, enough of that. Let's get to some comments and corrections from our last episode. Our humble little show is being listened to across the globe, 68 countries in total and counting. We are, of course, being listened to all over this great country of ours, all 50 states, but we're also growing in popularity worldwide, little by little, brick by brick. Currently, the U.S. makes up 49% of our listening audience, followed by India at 39%, And that's healthy. Put me on a billboard in India. I want to be on a billboard in India. We're on fire in the UK and Canada this week, followed by France, Australia, Mexico, Germany, Ireland, which has regained the number 9 spot, and Malaysia, which round out our top 10. I also want to give a special shout out to our 3 new listeners in Sudan this week. Salam alaikum, Sudan. We're currently averaging more listeners per episode than ever before. Still true thanks to you. We're still adding followers over on X, where finally we have surpassed 10,000 followers there. And that means that I'm a micro-influencer, apparently. I have been made aware that having more than 10,000 followers on one social media platform, which we now do, in fact makes me a micro influencer. I'm the Muggsy Bogues of influencing. I'll be influencing people, but just a tiny 6-pound, 8-ounce baby Jesus a little bit. Okay. If you're not one of those 10,000 followers, you can find us there at In the Shed 4. And you can also subscribe to our YouTube channel at In the Shed with Wes Anderson 6670. Please consider supporting the show by leaving us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. If you leave us a review this week, we will give you a shout out on our next episode. By sharing the show with a friend, word of mouth is still how we grow. And by joining our membership club over at patreon.com/intheshed4, you can donate as little as $1 or subscribe for exclusive content for as little as $4 a month. If you keep supporting the show, I'll keep bringing you the news. If you subscribe, like, share, and review, we will keep growing this thing together. All right, enough of that. We've got a great show for you this morning, but first let's get to some listener emails. Our first email comes from Jeff from Idaho, Potato Land, who writes, Wes, just finding the show, really enjoying getting the news in a different way. What do you make of all the talk of Joe Biden's cognitive decline? Haven't heard you cover it on the show. Well, Jeff, I'm so glad that you found the show all the way out there in potato country. That's a cool thing to hear. People are still finding the show from all over these wonderful United States of America. A country where our president is 81 years old. Listen, man, we certainly have covered Joe Biden's presidency on this show, some of his victories, some of his gaffes, some difficult moments, policy. One thing you're not going to hear on this show very much, because I am a journalist, is me, who is not a medical professional, making suppositions about somebody else's health or wellness. It just doesn't interest me to do so. I'm not going to waste time speculating on that, and this is not a show where we just cover Donald Trump and Joe Biden all the time. If that's what you're into, there are plenty of cable news shows that do just that. But that's not us. We're trying to give you a different spin on the news. We're trying to bring you things that aren't being covered nationally, or that at least aren't being covered in this way. But this is a topic that has been in the news lately with the special report that's been released by Mr. Herr, which is confusing, Mr. Herr, that basically said that Joe Biden would not be prosecuted for his mishandling of classified documents, storing them in his garage, in his convertible, because according to Mr. Herr, a jury would find him as a sympathetic old man with an unreliable memory. And so the issue of Joe Biden's cognitive abilities has been in the forefront of the news. He was, as many Democrats were, infuriated by the release of such claims within the report, and he threw together a hastily prepared news conference where he was defiant and angry and wanted to prove that he does not have a faulty memory. And at the news conference, he said that the president of Mexico, Sisi, had taken in refugees from Gaza thanks to him. And Mexico does not border Gaza. Of course, he meant the president of Egypt. In the last couple weeks, publicly on camera, Joe Biden has alleged that he has met with different European leaders who have in fact been dead for a decade. And Jon Stewart has returned to The Daily Show. In his first episode back, he railed against the fact that we have the two choices for president that we have. Two of the oldest ever to run for president. Joe Biden is the oldest that we've ever had to hold office. If he gets reelected, he will be president until he's 85 or 86 years old. Look, I'm not here to speculate on whether or not Joe Biden has dementia. I'm not here to analyze the shuffling way in which he walks. I'm not here to talk about him falling up the stairs on Air Force One and having to use the shorter steps. But I'm also not going to lie to you, okay? I'm also going to keep it a buck with you. Just like 70% of Americans, the man's age is a concern. Not because he may or may not have dementia, but because putting an 81-year-old person in charge of our country and in the most stressful job in the world is a difficult proposition. It just is. Has Joe Biden slowed down? Of course he has. He's 81 years old. Is he as sharp as he was when he was vice president? No, he's not. He's not as sharp as he was in 2020 when he was running for president. You can look at the speeches the man gave then and his speech pattern and how he talked versus now. It's not about a stutter. It's not even necessarily about whether or not he has dementia or cognitive decline on a scale that should cause medical concern. It's just that the man is old. He went to grade school with Moses. He was around to see the invention of the Model T. He's been in politics for like 60-something years. He's just old. He's an old man. So is it a concern that we may have a president reelected to office that will be serving until he's 85 years old? Yeah. Yeah, it's a concern. It's something to consider when you enter the voting booth. I'm interested in his policies. I'm interested in his character. I'm interested in how he works with Congress and who he puts into positions of power. But hey, the man's age has got to be a part of the math when you're voting for president. And look, I've been honest on this show. I'm not a supporter of Donald Trump or Joe Biden. I think that the fact that these are the two choices that we have in 2024 in America is tragic. I think that we can do better. I think the two-party system is not allowing us to do better, but I think that we could do better. And I think most of you agree with me. Glad you found the show. Thank you for writing in, Jeff. Our next email comes from Charles, aka Chuck, from Charlotte, North Carolina, who says, Wes, I listened to a couple episodes of the show prior to episode 69 and liked what I heard. Then you started bragging about being the #1 conservative news show on the Good Pods app. I didn't realize you were right-wing. It's a no for me, dog. Oh, Chuck. Oh, Chuckster. Look, man, if we're not your cup of tea, that's okay. I would hate to lose you as a listener. I appreciate you listening to the show. We have people who consider themselves right-wing that listen every episode. We have folks that consider themselves left-wing that listen every episode. I don't consider myself either. I wasn't so much as bragging about being the #1 conservative news show on the Good Pods app, which we are. I was more sharing my astonishment that we're considered a conservative news show and that we attained the #1 ranking. #1 in about 6 categories, by the way. And if we're #1 in anything, hey, I'm going to celebrate it, Chuck. Because I am not a professional. I don't have any advertisers. I don't make any money for this. I'm just a guy in the backyard of his home first thing in the morning, in a shed in Alabama, bringing you the news. Thanks for writing into the show. And finally, Madison from Missouri writes, and you know we love alliteration on this show, Madison from Missouri. Madison says, Wes, everyone is talking about Tucker Carlson interviewing Vladimir Putin. What say you? I say good for Tucker Carlson. I'm not a jealous individual, okay? So much of what you see in the covering of this story is jealousy. Jealousy on the part of those in the news industry that consider themselves better journalists or more legitimate journalists than Tucker Carlson, and they didn't get the interview and he did. It's just simple jealousy. The idea that because Vladimir Putin is a dictator, he's at war, he's committed atrocities, that he cannot be interviewed or that you're giving him a platform. Give me a break. This is what journalists have done for ages. They have gone to the difficult places and had conversations with world leaders, even those who are making decisions that we disagree with or that could cause harm to our nation. They interview them. They get their words and their account on record for the world to see, to give people a glimpse of who this person is, how they portray themselves, what lies they are telling, what truth can be found in what they say, if any at all. So I find it intellectually dishonest for a lot of these news organizations to say that Tucker Carlson is not a journalist or that what he did was somehow wrong. I think it rings hollow in his jealousy manifesting. Now, you can certainly look at the interview, and I haven't yet watched it all, but you can look at it and critique the way that he interviewed the man. You can make the argument that he should have given him a tougher interview. He did ask a couple of tough questions, but you can make the argument that he didn't hold Vladimir Putin to account. I'm fine with that. But to have a problem with the fact that he even interviewed him at all, miss me with that. Miss me with that. Thank you for writing into the show, Madison. That's all the listener emails this week. If you have any thoughts that you'd like to share, you can email the show at intheshedwithwes@gmail.com. Again, that's intheshedwithwes@gmail.com. I might even read it on air. All right, let's switch to this. Let's get to the news in the world of politics, and let's hit the headlines. Joe Biden oversees 7.2 million illegal aliens at southern border, equivalent to 2 years of U.S. births, writes Breitbart. Is another government shutdown coming? Asks Reason. U.S. warns Russia not to deploy nuclear-armed space weapon, says the Wall Street Journal. From the New York Times, a U.S. spacecraft lands on the moon for the first time since 1972. And finally, Nikki Haley says Trump sides with dictators who want to destroy America, and that is according to HuffPost. Our first story in the world of politics this week: Alabama prisoner's brain missing after UAB autopsy, says family. Another family claims their loved one was missing organs after dying in an Alabama prison, and that a funeral director discovered the problem and warned them against holding a viewing. The family claims in court records that the 74-year-old man's brain was missing, along with his other internal organs, after the body was returned from an autopsy at the University of Alabama, Birmingham. Charlene Drake's father, Charles Singleton, was serving time in prison for sex crimes. He died at a Tennessee hospital on November 2, 2021, according to a sworn statement entered in federal court records. At the time of his death, Singleton was incarcerated at the Hamilton Aged and Infirmed Prison in Hamilton, Alabama. Drake said that her family asked for her father's body to be sent to Usery Funeral Home in Pell City. She asked the funeral home director to have a viewing, but the director advised that it would be difficult to prepare his body for viewing, as his body was already in a noticeable state of decomposition characterized by advanced skin slippage, according to a sworn statement signed by Drake in court records. Drake's statement is part of an exhibit in support of the case of Brandon Dotson, whose family said that he was returned to them missing a heart after dying at Ventress Correctional Facility last year. The dispute over the missing heart is pending in federal court. Court records don't reflect a separate case involving Singleton. A few days after Singleton was taken to the funeral home, Drake said she and her family went to see her dad's body. The director informed us that there was no organs in the body. He said normally the organs are in a bag placed in the back of the body after an autopsy, but Singleton had been brought to the funeral home with no internal organs. His brain had also been removed. According to the director, he still had his eyes, but all other organs were gone. Drake did not respond to requests for comment for the story. According to her statement, Drake said that the chaplain of the prison called to tell her about her father's death, and then she asked to claim the body. The following day, she said the University of Alabama at Birmingham received Singleton's body for an autopsy. A representative from UAB would not confirm or deny that the institution performed Singleton's autopsy, citing laws related to the privacy of medical records. Autopsies are standard for inmates who die in prison. Testimony in a January court hearing in Dodson's missing heart case revealed that some inmates' bodies are sent to UAB for autopsies, while others are sent to the Alabama Department of Forensic Sciences. Dodson underwent an autopsy at the Alabama Department of Forensics. Drake said her daughter called UAB after the discovery of her father's missing organs, but was never able to talk to anyone with the pathology department. We were never provided an explanation of where his organs are. A representative from the Alabama Department of Corrections said that ADOC doesn't perform autopsies, and the prison facilities have zero surgical capabilities. But a spokesperson from UAB sent a lengthy statement saying the university doesn't comment on pending or threatened litigation, but added that UAB only conducts autopsies after obtaining consent or authorization from the appropriate state official. For inmate autopsies, UAB said the department is responsible for obtaining proper authorization from the appropriate legal representative of the deceased. The authorization forms not only provide permission for the autopsy, but also specifically include consent for the removal of organs or tissues for diagnostic or other testing, including final disposition, said the spokesperson. Nevertheless, UAB can say that it does not harvest organs from bodies of inmates for research, as has been reported in media reports. UAB has one of the highest-ranked pathology programs in the country, said the statement. It is accredited by the College of American Pathologists and is staffed by credentialed physicians who are certified by the American Board of Pathology. Its autopsy procedures are conducted in compliance with the College of American Pathology guidelines. Moreover, a panel of medical ethicists reviewed and endorsed our autopsy protocols. UAB's statement also detailed how autopsies work and why some organs may be removed during the procedure due to the clinical standard. The collection and retention of tissues and fluid specimens is an important aspect of routine autopsy practice and necessary for determining cause of death. In many cases, only fluids for toxology and other laboratory analysis and small portions of tissues for microscopy are retained, said the statement. In some cases, however, the pathologist performing the autopsy may, in their professional judgment, determine that evidence-based medicine requires the retention of organs or organ blocks for further examination and testing. These specimens may be kept beyond release of the body to the next of kin for burial or other disposition in the course of customary and optimal determination of the cause of death. UAB attempts to accommodate family wishes while also ensuring that it conducts a complete cause of death investigation. So, we have covered the case of Mr. Dodson on this show previously. The man who was incarcerated in an Alabama prison, who passed away, whose family asked for the body to be returned to them and didn't receive it for quite some time. And then finally, when they did, all of his internal organs were missing. With no explanation, with no record, with no paper trail of who had been involved in his autopsy, of where his organs were, and pretty much everybody played dumb. Everybody pretended not to know. Even in court, in front of a judge, 14 different witnesses came forward and said, hey, it wasn't us. We don't know what happened. We don't know who's at fault. We don't know where the organs are. But it wasn't us. And now the family has found at least one other example of the same thing happening, where someone passed away in an Alabama prison, an autopsy was conducted, both ADOC and UAB are somehow involved, and the body is returned to his family missing all of his internal organs, including his brain, except for his eyes. And we talked about how this is horrendous and tragic and upsetting to the family, and how even if someone is receiving punishment because of a crime they've committed, they're still a human being, and their family still deserves for them to be treated like a human being. And we've covered extensively on this show the problems in our state, my state, this state of Alabama, when it comes to prisons, when it comes to the justice system, when it comes to needed reforms. And this just furthers that. This just highlights that need. Something is going on in Alabama prisons that is untoward. And hey, my guess is, I'm just spitballing, I'm just a guy in his shed. But my guess is if there's two examples of this happening, there are probably others. And there needs to be a thorough and swift investigation. An independent investigation, not one of these situations where the prison says, hey, we will investigate ourselves and let you know what we find. Because, hey, they find nothing. There needs to be an independent investigation. There needs to be some people who are held to account. For UAB to say it's a part of autopsies for tissues to be removed for testing, yeah, we're aware. What's not normal is for all of the person's organs to be taken, not returned, with no paper trail, no explanation, and zipped lips when the family has questions. This is not normal. This is not good. Something fishy is afoot. There's some shenanigans and some tomfoolery and some malarkey at play here. And it's morbid, and it's unfortunate, and it's quite possibly corrupt. At best, it is a complete breakdown in chain of custody and proper paperwork, at best. And at worst, it's the beginning of an uncovering of corruption and possible illegality on the part of somebody, somewhere in this process of prisoners passing away and their bodies being handled in the way that they should. And Mr. Dotson's case is currently pending in federal court, and I hope that they get the answers that they seek. The family, I hope that they get to the bottom of this. I hope that they have retained a good lawyer, and we will stay on this case. We'll keep our ear to the ground and our nose to the grindstone, because this is bizarre, and it's not how things are supposed to go, and it's happening right here in our home state. Prisoners being returned to their families, missing every internal organ with no explanation. Somebody's not telling the truth. Somebody's at fault. We need to know who, and they need to be held to account. We're calling for an investigation, an independent and swift and thorough investigation. Our next story in the world of politics: RFK Jr.'s PAC returned millions to a donor. Campaign experts say that is highly unusual. Why did the American Values Super PAC refund $9.65 million to one of its biggest donors? The Super PAC supporting Robert F. Kennedy Jr. padded its war chest with millions of dollars in contributions from one of the best-known private security executives in the country, Gavin DeBecker. And then it did something remarkable. It returned nearly all of the funds, making his contributions effectively alone. The move shocked campaign finance watchdogs, who said they've never seen such an arrangement before. DeBecker's contributions helped the PAC report a high fundraising total that can in turn be seen as a sign of legitimacy for the committee. All told, DeBecker made $10 million in donations to the Super PAC, $9.65 million of which was returned. If someone gives that kind of money to a Super PAC, they're expecting it to be used by the Super PAC for political purposes. I've not ever heard of a situation of putting out millions of dollars to a Super PAC to get them over a bridge and then get the money refunded, said Craig Holman of the ethics watchdog group Public Citizen. High fundraising totals like the ones American Values PAC has been touting over the last year lend a veneer of validity to Super PACs, but getting even more contributions from other donors. Using a series of back-and-forth transactions that take on de facto loans without having to report them as debt also obscures American Values' actual finances. The campaign finance landscape is constantly evolving, with campaigns and their allies pushing new boundaries every election cycle, and the Kennedy Super PAC will end up being seen as a pioneer or an outlier. If others adopt its practices, outside groups could have another tool for shirking transparency. Both DeBecker and Tony Lyons, co-founder of the Super PAC, said that there was no sleight of hand in the arrangement. They both called it bridge funding in separate responses to questions from Politico. They said DeBecker can ask for the donations back at his own discretion if the money has not yet been spent. I have the option to ask for some of my donation back, but there's no guarantee, DeBecker wrote in a text. DeBecker also said that bridge funding happens all the time in the business world and other forums. Both DeBecker and Lyons declined to elaborate further on the arrangement. Whether loan or bridge payments, the money sent to DeBecker underscores the central role he's come to occupy in the Kentucky campaign operations. One of the country's most famous security specialists, he also is now a top vendor for the Kennedy campaign. It paid out $1.48 million to Gavin DeBecker and Associates for security services and travel expenses, a massive sum of money for an operation that spent $16.6 million in total in 2023. The company advertises itself as a security firm of prominent individuals and once provided security for Amazon CEO Jeff Bezos, including as he went to war with the National Enquirer over reports about his text and love life, and former California Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger. The Kennedy campaign declined an interview request about the expenditures to the company. DeBecker's personal wealth comes not just from his role as a security expert, but he's also a prolific author and talking head. He signaled he is comfortable parting with some of that money to aid Kennedy's independent bid, including a planned $4 million donation he's set to make to the Super PAC on Thursday, February the 15th. If the PAC has the means to return some, they will. That way, I'll be financially able to help on another day they might need the help. Every time I've sent millions of dollars to the PAC, there's the possibility that none of it will come back. If that happens, it means the PAC needed the money and spent the money. If that helps get RFK Jr. elected, I'm happy with the outcome, DeBecker wrote in a text. Campaign finance experts said they've never seen a donor-PAC relationship like that between DeBecker and the American Values 2024, or heard of a predetermined agreement to refund unspent money in the middle of a campaign cycle. We don't see stuff like this. We see stuff go back down to the donor from time to time if there's left over, but not like, this apparent arrangement beforehand, said Robert McGuire, research director at the government watchdog group Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington. My understanding is the assumption when you give to a super PAC is that money is gone, unless by chance they have money left over when the election is done. Then you ask for it back, he added. The flow of money between American Values 2024 and DeBecker is so great that the Super PAC has spent significantly more money on refunds than on directly supporting Kennedy's candidacy in 2023. The group spent less than $1 million on independent expenditures to support Kennedy last year, mostly on newspaper ads and merchandise, far less than the $9.65 million in refunds to DeBecker. Refunding DeBecker's donations accounted for about 70% of the PAC's total expenditures last year. That might be changing now as the Super PAC said it spent $7 million on an ad that ran during the Super Bowl. Excluding refunds, DeBecker is the second highest donor to American Values 2024, only behind Tim Mellon, a GOP mega donor who gave $15.5 million in 2023. None of Mellon's contributions have been refunded. DeBecker is also the biggest line item for Kennedy's campaign. Payments to a security firm were the highest aggregate expense for the campaign last year, further entwining DeBecker's financial relationship with Kennedy's presidential bid. It certainly seems like he has a financial interest in helping keep the candidate viable as long as possible, said Sourav Ghosh of Campaign Legal Center. It stands to reason that money dries up if RFK Jr. is no longer in the race. So yeah, I think there's definitely an aspect of this where he's playing on both sides of the equation. So, RFK Jr.'s presidential campaign and the largest super PAC that is supporting and funding his run for president seem to have an arrangement with this donor, Mr. DeBecker, to treat most of his giving as a loan. They're taking in this money and reporting it and touting the big donations that they've received, and then they're returning a large amount of it to him. And while I have been quick to tell you that money in politics and a lack of transparency surrounding it is one of the biggest and most prevalent and pernicious concerns when it comes to politics in our country, I actually have a different opinion on this matter. I'm actually going to go the other way. In this instance, I'm actually going to say, hey, way to go, RFK Jr. Good job. Way to outsmart the system. Way to find a loophole. And look, I'm not in support of financial indiscretion or skirting campaign finance law by any means at all, by any candidate, no matter what. But in the system that we currently have, this two-party system, this duopoly, where they work together, the uniparty works together, Democrat and Republican, to make sure that nobody else is allowed in the game, that nobody else has a fair chance to be elected, where they make it so difficult to get on the ballot as an independent running for president in the country, where they try to keep you limited to certain states so that you cannot gain enough delegates to be a threat. I say good for RFK Jr. Good for his campaign. Good for this super PAC. Good for Mr. DeBecker. Because it's going to take things like this in order for the uniparty system to actually be threatened. For there to be any daylight in the cracks of the scaffolding that they have built and the infrastructure that they've put together that holds everybody else at bay. And look, 70% of our country doesn't want Donald Trump or Joe Biden. 70% of our country says we would like another candidate, even the Republicans, even the Democrats. A majority of our country wants other options. The fastest growing political party in our country is independents. Those of us who are middle of the road, those of us who are common sense Americans, who are sick of the game, who are sick of partisan politics, who are sick of folks that only represent themselves, who exist in Washington to enrich themselves and their families. And it's going to take creativity. It's going to take pushing the limits. It's going to take finding loopholes to even give anyone else a chance. And will RFK Jr. get elected president? No. He won't. In 2024, he won't. But is it possible that because 70% of Americans want a different option, that if he's creative, that if he pushes the envelope, that if he tries, that if he gets on all of the ballots in all 50 states, that he could at least create momentum that snowballs and that builds toward this duopoly no longer having a stranglehold on American politics when it comes to presidential elections? I think it's possible. I think it could be the start of something. I think it could be the first of many baby steps necessary to do what George Washington said that we should do, and not allow a couple of political parties to insulate themselves while keeping everyone else out. So even though I'm all for transparency, and I'm not for money in politics, and I'm against so much of what these super PACs stand for and do, and how they operate, in this particular instance, I say good. Good for Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Possibly good for America. What do you think? Is this okay? Is this a problem? Do you support what Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and his campaign are doing here? What do you think of RFK as a candidate? Email the show at intheshedwithwes@gmail.com. Get at us on X at intheshed4. We would love to hear from you. Our next story in the world of politics. He died in a tragic accident. Why did the internet say he was murdered? Within a day of the death of Matthew Sackman, 19, on New York City's subway tracks, so-called obituary pirates had flooded search results with false information. It was the kind of tragic accident that reverberates through a community. A first-year college student out late in New York City on New Year's Eve falls onto the subway tracks and is killed by an oncoming train. Word of the 19-year-old's death spread quickly among the people who knew the young man, Matthew Sackman, who went by Mateo from his days at the collegiate school in New York or Georgetown University. As the circle of people learning the news widened beyond Mr. Sackman's immediate family, concern and curiosity about his shocking death led many of them to Google, where they typed his name and what little they knew to the search bar. Mateo Sackman subway accident. Mateo Sackman obituary. Mateo Sackman death. But instead of answers, anybody searching for information was confronted by a blizzard of poorly written news articles, shady-looking YouTube videos, and inaccurate obituaries. Some said he was 29 years old when he was 19 and was from Nantucket. His family did spend summers there, but he was from New York. Others made an even more shocking claim. Mr. Sackman, they falsely reported, had been stabbed to death in a Bronx subway station. In fact, according to a statement from his family, Mr. Sackman and a friend were fooling around on a platform at the East Broadway stop in Manhattan when he fell onto the tracks and was killed instantly by a train entering the station. There were sites I'd never heard of, information that was completely wrong, said Peter DeLuca, whose son Matthew went to high school with Mr. Sackman. It didn't make sense, and yet the information was spreading. Mr. DeLuca, the owner of several funeral homes in Manhattan, had come across other dubious obituaries recently and thus sensed something was amiss. But he and his wife were soon hearing from acquaintances who believed Mr. Sackman had been stabbed. The young man's friends were already grieving. Now many of them were unnerved. And hours after his death, his name and likeness ricocheted around a dark corner of the internet where profiteers using artificial intelligence tools capitalize on the anguish and desperation of the people who are mourning him. "I was looking for the truth," said Devin Marish, 19, a childhood friend who was scrambling to piece the story together from San Diego, "but I didn't find it there." In the hours after his death, friends and family scrambled to find out more about Mr. Sackman's death. Few details were available. No obituary, no news stories. But as people searched Google for information, someone on the other side of the world was searching for exactly the kinds of reverberations that Mr. Sackman's death had caused. Faisal Shan Khan, an internet marketer in India, knew nothing about Mr. Sackman. But suddenly enough people were searching for Matteo Sackman to push his name up a list of trending Google search topics that Mr. Khan was monitoring as part of a digital money-making scheme. To Mr. Khan, the rising interest meant that an audience for online content that did not yet exist was growing rapidly before his eyes, and he was poised to deliver it. Mr. Khan, 30, is part of a booming cottage industry online in which enterprising people take advantage of the void of information in the wake of a sudden tragedy to drive web traffic to hastily assembled articles and YouTube videos. These so-called obituary pirates seem to know about the deaths of everyday Americans long before they've been reported publicly anywhere else. Mr. Khan, whose website, FSK Hub, was the first site identified by the New York Times to post anything about Mr. Sackman's death, agreed to walk the Times through the process. Mr. Khan has spent the past 5 years building an online advertising business with websites devoted to celebrity news and tech reviews, but he said obituaries make up a huge part of his content farm. Working from his living room in New Delhi, he closely monitors Google Trends for activity related to certain grim keywords: obituary, accident, death. Google allows anyone to track usage trends for search items in windows of time as narrow as the previous hour. When Mr. Khan searches those keywords on Google Trends, the company shows what else people who are searching for those terms are actively searching for in the moment. Matteo Sackman subway accident, Matteo Sackman obituary, Matteo Sackman death. These were the kinds of searches for truth that precipitated the flow of misinformation back to people doing the searching. Based on related searches like subway accident, Mr. Khan could surmise how Mr. Sackman had died. Mr. Khan could then conduct a cursory search of his own around the internet for any biographical information, leading him to a LinkedIn page detailing Mr. Sackman's work history. And finally, he could prompt an artificial intelligence tool called a large language model to create a short article. The article should be written in a conversational style, using personal pronouns, rhetorical questions, and analogies to engage the reader, read one prompt intended for a language model, which was accidentally published on FSK Hub. For his effort, Mr. Khan said he earns thousands of dollars each month from Google's ad network using numerous websites. But experts in internet marketing suggest that a more likely estimate would be less than $100 per month. Articles like Mr. Sackman's obituary would only fetch a penny or two per month, experts said. "Money is not my priority," said Mr. Khan in an interview. He described himself as an avid equestrian who unwinds by riding horses through the wilderness and dreams of becoming a journalist one day. "Writing blogs brings me joy," he added. In all, it took barely more than 24 hours for the search results of Mr. Sackman's name to be transformed into a minefield of ill-conceived, misleading content. "We were trying to find out what happened, but we saw some weird things," said David Lombardi, the owner of a nursery and furniture store in Nantucket where Mr. Sackman had worked a summer job. "I just stopped and thought, this doesn't feel right." Mr. Sackman died around 2:30 a.m. on New Year's Day. By 10:31 p.m., an obituary appeared on Mr. Khan's website, FSK Hub. It was mostly accurate but offered only elementary facts. A wave of videos was also published on YouTube. They were filmed on busy streets or inside living rooms, and their narrators spoke in English, Urdu, or other languages. The videos introduced their own errors, claiming that he was a famous singer or actor. In the ensuing days, FSK Hub's many competitors followed suit. Some of them used nearly identical language to what appeared on FSK Hub. By January the 2nd, obituaries started claiming that Mr. Sackman had been stabbed in the neck in a brutal, unprovoked New Year's Day attack. Many stories included language directly from a CBS News article published an hour before the obituary went online. CBS News described an unnamed 29-year-old man who was attacked on a subway platform in the Bronx. Obituary websites carelessly melded that incident into Mr. Sackman's story. The YouTube videos and most of the websites included ads from Google, creating a revenue pipeline for both the online marketers and the technology giant. GPT-0, a tool that identifies text produced by large language models, indicated that every sentence in this article was likely to have been written by AI. Most obituaries had similar scores. In one case, the article made its origin explicit with a paragraph from a language model that was accidentally left at the end of the article. This is an article about 1,800 words long about the obituary of Mateo Sackman, the victim of the bloody subway accident in New York. I've added additional details about Mateo's biography, accidental events, and funeral plans and farewell. Hopefully the article will be as complete and as good as requested. All anyone wants in the event of a loved one's death is for the memory of the deceased to be treated with dignity. The machine-generated obituaries are the opposite of that. What the Sackman family experience is becoming increasingly common for the bereaved, according to scores of complaints published online and interviews with people who endured eerily similar ordeals. They were alarmed to see the fake obituaries posted before any official announcements or news stories. They were upset to read baseless speculation about possible causes of death in the AI-generated articles, and they were disheartened that seemingly nothing was being done about it. It's horrific and disturbing because it's so predatory, said Chris Silver Smith, a digital marketing consultant in Austin, Texas, whose brother-in-law was killed in a car accident last September. People believe they can rely on Google, not only for news about a person's death, but also for information about funeral services, or to donate money to a grieving family. Yet many now step away feeling unsettled or angry, or in some cases fearful that they had been exposed to digital scams or malware. I felt like I had just clicked on something that was going to make my phone blow up, said Peggy Hammond, 54, a teacher in Birmingham, Alabama, who began deleting applications in a panic after seeing several sketchy articles this month about an acquaintance's death. It makes you not trust Google. For now, there seem to be few options for anyone hoping to have these fake obituaries removed. Audrey Wade, 27, a graduate student in Salt Lake City, filed dozens of complaints to Google last August about websites and YouTube videos that targeted a friend who had unexpectedly died. But she never heard back, and the content was never removed. They created this platform with all of its unanticipated possibilities and are therefore responsible for managing its use and abuse better, she said. Though the obituaries appeared on other search engines like Microsoft Bing, Google played a unique role in spreading news about Mr. Sackman across the internet. Google Trends surfaced terms that internet marketers like Mr. Khan could use. Google Search circulated the obituaries for Mr. Sackman's family and friends to find. YouTube, which is owned by Google, allowed creators to spread falsehoods about Mr. Sackman to different audiences. And ads powered by Google appeared on most of the obituary websites, earning revenue for the website's owners and for Google. A Google spokesman said that the company was aware that low-quality obituaries can flood search results after someone dies, and it was exploring ways to address it. The company pointed to policies that penalize websites for using automation, including AI, and said that upcoming changes to Google Trends would reduce the chances that names of people who are not well known will be highlighted. Google always aims to surface high-quality information, but data voids are a known challenge for all search engines, a Google spokesman shared in an emailed statement. We understand how distressing this content can be, and we're working to launch updates that will significantly improve search results for queries like these. Google removed several YouTube videos about Mr. Sackman after the Times inquired about them and disabled ads on many of the obituary websites. Mr. Sackman made the most of his lone semester at Georgetown. He joined the university's marketing association, volunteered with an organization aiding homeless people, and worked at a bar on campus, according to the Hoya, the school's newspaper, which published the first legitimate news story about his death on January 19th. What happened is devastating, and it hit the community hard, and we miss him, said Mr. Marish, who described his childhood friend as charismatic and smart. It's been a hard pill to swallow. We haven't experienced something like this before. It's a novel experience, and it's a brutal experience. Collegiate, the elite private boys' school on the Upper West Side that Mr. Sackman had attended, sent out an email on the night of January 2nd noting that he had died as a result of a tragic accident. Georgetown did the same with the same vague language and no other details. The family had wanted to divulge information on their own pace, but in the depths of their grief as they came together at home to process the excruciating pain of losing their son, Mr. Sackman's parents were already hearing from family members that obituaries with false information were proliferating online, the wrong age, the wrong location, the wrong everything. The stories published online were completely wrong, the family said in a statement. On January 5th, 4 days after their son's death, the Sackmans had a paid obituary published in the Times, remembering their son as a young man full of joy who exuded warmth and love, positive energy, and care for all. But by then, the clamor for information had passed. The erroneous stories about Mr. Sackman remained, though no longer at the very top of the search results for his name. The pirates who published them, having extracted a few pennies, had long since moved on. So, obituary pirates. Have you ever heard of such a thing? This is the new reality when it comes to AI and the use of AI to write news articles, to scour the most popular search engines like Google for things that are trending and to put together some information to cobble together something quickly and hastily to put out so that people will click on it. And so those responsible for such websites can make a little bit of money. I thought this was newsworthy because we've talked a lot about AI on this show, about the implications of using such technology, the problems that it can cause, the way that it can affect our society as a whole. And this is one disheartening example in a litany of examples of that taking place. Mr. Khan in India, you are despicable. To take advantage of the untimely death of a young person to make money is a sad existence to have. And you know we love India on this show. 39% of our listening audience comes from India. This is not an indictment of the Indian people. We love you, India. Put me on a billboard in India. But Mr. Khan, you are not welcome here. Not in this shed. Obituary pirates. Who could have conceived of such a thing? And my heart goes out to the parents of Mateo Sackman, to his friends, to his family that had to deal with such tragic lies being published online about his passing. They're already grieving, they're already experiencing the tragedy of loss of life, a life that was snuffed out far too young in an accidental way. And then on top of their grief, they had to deal with this nonsense. Google should be ashamed. Their statements about how these things happen, but updates should take care of it. Hey, give me a break. Give me a break. And people in the article quoted as saying you're supposed to be able to trust Google. Hey, you can't. You shouldn't. Don't be naive. Wake up to what's going on. DuckDuckGo would never. DuckDuckGo would never. Ask Jeeves would never. But this is what Google does. It's a behemoth. It's a giant. The toothpaste is out of the tube. It's too big to control. And when you add in things like AI and easy ways for people to get clicks that then return money to their bank accounts, you run into unfortunate situations like this one. And I thought you should know about it. I thought it was an interesting article. My thoughts, my prayers, my good vibes go out to Mr. Sackman's family and friends. But not to you, Mr. Khan. And not to you, Google. Do better. Do better. Our last story in the world of politics this week. Flacco, escaped Central Park zoo owl and defier of doubts, is dead. Let loose by an act of vandalism, the Eurasian eagle owl died after apparently striking an Upper West Side building, according to the zoo. Flacco, the Eurasian eagle owl whose escape from the Central Park Zoo and subsequent life on the loose in Manhattan captured the public's attention, died Friday night after apparently striking a building on the Upper West Side, officials said. The Wildlife Conservation Society, which operates the zoo, said in a statement that Flacco had been found on the ground after hitting a building on West 89th Street. Building residents contacted the Wild Bird Fund, a rescue organization, whose staff members responded quickly, retrieved him, and declared him dead a short time later, the society said. Zoo employees took him to the Bronx Zoo, where a necropsy will be performed to determine the cause of death. He would have turned 14 next month. Flacco's year as a free bird began on the evening of February 2, 2023, when someone shredded the mesh on the modest enclosure where he had lived nearly his entire life. The police said in January that no arrests had been made and the investigation was continuing. The vandal who damaged Flacco's exhibit jeopardized the safety of the bird and is ultimately responsible for his death, the Wildlife Conservation Society said in a statement. We're still hopeful that the NYPD, which is investigating the vandalism, will ultimately make an arrest. Flacco began attracting a passionate fan base almost as soon as he showed up on a Fifth Avenue sidewalk the night he was set loose. He looked out of place with police officers standing nearby and Bergdorf Goodman a short flight away. Well, that was a hoot, the New York Police Department's 19th precinct posted on social media. We tried to help this little wise guy, but he had enough of his growing audience and flew off. Soon, Flacco had settled in Central Park. As the days passed and he remained free, the question of whether he could survive outside the zoo after a lifetime there turned his plight into an underdog story. When he showed that he could endure, he became a feathered feel-good story in troubled times, with birdwatchers, ornithologists, and everyday New Yorkers following him in person, or in many cases tracking his exploits online. But each day outside captivity was risky, even without the hazards presented by an urban environment. Wild Eurasian eagle owls can live more than 40 years in captivity, but only 20 on average in their natural habitat. Striking a building, especially a window, was one of several lethal threats he faced. Others included death by poisoning via the rodenticide in the rats that he ate, and a fatal collision with a vehicle. For more than a year, though, Flacco proved immune. He was able to avoid vehicles by sticking largely to rooftops, water towers, and other elevated elements of the built environment after leaving Central Park last fall. But the risk that he would be killed by a building strike was great. As many as 230,000 birds a year die in New York City when they hit windows, according to the National Audubon Society. 230,000 birds a year die in New York City when they hit windows? 230,000 birds a year. That means in my lifetime, over 8 million birds have died in New York City from flying into windows. That's a genocide. Peter, where are you at? Where are you at, Peter? Why can we not just pay for these buildings to have their windows tinted? Why can we just not make a agreement with the owners of buildings in New York City that we will not be using Windex so that these birds can live? 230,000 birds a year. I am shocked and appalled. David Lee, who with his partner Jacqueline Emery has followed and photographed Flacco since his escape, said in an email that he and Mrs. Emery were sad beyond words, but holding on to all our fond memories of him. Flacco was hatched on March 15, 2010 at the Sylvian Heights Bird Park in Scotland Neck, North Carolina, according to Association of Zoos and Aquarium records. He arrived at the Central Park Zoo less than 2 months later. He was initially placed with the snow leopards, snow monkeys, and red pandas. Later he was moved to an enclosure the size of a department store window near the Penguin House exhibit. And Flacco was living in a habitat the size of a department store window. Hey, that's no way for this man to live. I'm glad for Flacco that he escaped. I'm not the one that let him out, NYPD. It was not me. I haven't been to New York City in over a decade, okay? But I'm glad that this man had a taste of freedom. That he got to fly. That he got to perch up on water towers and on fire escapes and bring joy to the people of New York City, at least for a little while. He was far from his natural home. Eurasian eagle owls, known by the scientific name bubo. Eurasian eagle owls, known by the scientific name bubo. Hey science, do better. Why y'all out here naming a whole group of owls bubo? Come up with a better name. Are apex predators typically found in much of Europe, Scandinavia, Russia, and Central Asia. And you know Vladimir Putin has one of these as a pet. But I digress. They're among the world's largest owls with a wingspan as wide as 6 feet. They thrive in mountains and other rocky areas near forests, swooping down at night to hunt rodents, rabbits, and other prey. In November 2010 news release citing Flacco's large talons and intense stare, the Conservation Society said he was adjusting very well to his new home and was a truly awe-inspiring sight. But Flacco's life at the zoo was unremarkable. Only after he left did he begin to inspire true awe. In his early days of freedom, Conservation Society employees tried several times to retrieve him. They backed off after he proved that a lifetime of captivity had not dulled his essential nature, and in the face of growing public sentiment that he be allowed to remain out of the zoo. A turning point came when he was seen devouring a rat and later coughing up an undigestible pellet of fur and bones. A major concern for everyone at the beginning was whether Flacco would be able to hunt and eat, the Conservation Society said in a statement 10 days after his departure from the zoo. That is no longer a concern. And I think maybe that this is the answer that New York City has been looking for. It wasn't too long ago that we covered on the show how they were hiring a rat czar. Do you remember this story? New York City was going to pay a salary of nearly $100,000 a year to a rat czar, someone in charge of fighting this infestation of rats. And as it turns out, they just need more Eurasian eagle owls. I'm calling on New York City to have about 10 of these bad boys posted in Central Park and watch what happens to the rat population. I digress. With that worry put aside, the society said it would rethink our approach to addressing Flacco's new circumstances. We will continue to monitor him, though not as intensely, and look opportunistically to recover him when the situation is right. Before long, Flacco had settled into a comfortable life at the park's north end, perching in favorite trees and snatching up meals. He left the park's relative safety around Halloween, embarking on a tour of Manhattan that took him to the East Village, the Lower East Side, and the Upper East Side, delighting those he encountered when he turned up on terraces and air conditioners that resembled the cliff ledges to which Eurasian eagle owls are accustomed. By December, Flacco had largely settled on the Upper West Side, ranging from the 70s to the 90s, and from Central Park West to Riverside Drive, returning to certain buildings repeatedly. He typically spent his days sleeping on fire escapes and courtyards where it was warmer and out of the wind. At dusk, he would fly out in search of prey. Mostly he ate rats, although he had lately been seen catching pigeons. One poignant aspect of Flacco's Manhattan life was that as a non-native species, he was destined never to find a mate. That did not stop him from trying, sometimes hooting into the post-midnight darkness for hours to establish his territory and declare his interest in breeding. And that makes me sad for my boy Flacco. He's just posted up on a fire escape at 2 o'clock in the morning. Who will love me? Who is like me? Who will come hang out with me? And he doesn't know. He doesn't realize that he's the only one. That there aren't any others. He was searching for a mate. And there's no Tinder for owls. Flacco's last reported hoots were heard from a water tower on West 86th Street east of Columbus Avenue at 3 a.m. last Sunday, according to David Barrett's Manhattan Bird Alert account on social media. On Friday, Flacco was found just a few blocks away. So, let's pour one out for the big homie Flacco. Gone but never forgotten. This one is for you, big homie.
Spend all your time waiting for that second chance, for a break that would make it okay. There's always some reason to feel not good enough.
We love you, Flacco. Such a beautiful creature. We'll never forget you.
Memories seep through my veins. Let me be empty, weightless, and maybe I'll find some peace tonight in the arms of the angel.
Flacco the Eurasian eagle owl. I didn't learn about this man till a couple weeks ago, and I absolutely fell in love with this story. I thought it was so neat that this owl, who had been raised in captivity his entire life, who lived in an enclosure the size of a department store window, had been freed by what the zoo called an act of vandalism. And they tried to capture him because they thought he couldn't survive. And little did they know that he would thrive in Manhattan, that he would thrive in Central Park, that he would thrive catching rats, perching on fire escapes, and searching for a mate that he could not find late into the evening. It's a pretty cool story, and you know that nobody covers wildlife in the world of news media like we do here on In the Shed with Wes Anderson. I thought it was really cool that Flacco the Owl made it in the urban jungle and survived for over a year on his own. A pretty interesting story. We're sad to learn of his passing. We will remember you. Your memory will live on, Flacco the Owl. Rest in peace, big dog. Fly high, my guy, Flacco. Never in my life have I cried over a bird. But as I read about the demise of this great winged man, my eyes are a little salty. Flacco is on the Mount Rushmore of New York City legends, and possibly with a wingspan of 6 feet, maybe the explanation for all of the Mothman sightings in cities like Chicago. Maybe this man's brother is on the loose elsewhere. I'm not saying, I'm just saying. That's all the news in the world of politics this week. Let's switch to this, the news in the world of sports, and let's hit the headlines. Lowry's Sixer debut includes ovation and stitches. Seahawks rework quarterback Geno Smith's contract. SEC suspends Alabama's Wagyu 1 game for elbow. LSU fined $100,000 for court storming versus Kentucky. UConn runs into buzzsaw as Creighton stuns the number 1 team. Fields tired of trade talk, says, "I just want it to be over." Hawks forward Nneka Okongwu out for foreseeable future. Jokic, 4th player ever to tally triple-double against every other team. Texas makes head football coach Steve Sarkisian the latest $10 million coach. And finally, college football officials are discussing a 14-team playoff for 2026. Our first story in the world of sports this week, Seattle Seahawks reportedly helped Alabama pull off an incredibly shady move. News broke on Friday night that Alabama Crimson Tide offensive coordinator Ryan Grubb is leaving Tuscaloosa to become the Seattle Seahawks' new offensive coordinator. Grubb followed new Crimson Tide coach Kalen DeBoer, Spanish for the pig, from Washington to Alabama last month. According to the Seattle Times, this is a move that actually has been in work for quite a while. But the Seahawks waited to make the move official in part so the 30-day transfer window that opened to Alabama when Nick Saban retired could pass. From the Seattle Times, though the Seahawks had interest in Grubb from the start, one reason for waiting to make the hire official was to allow a 30-day window for Alabama players to enter the transfer portal to pass. Nick Saban announced he was retiring as Alabama's coach, opening a 30-day window, but the window passed on Saturday. The Seattle Times' Bob Condata also pointed out that Grubb appeared at a booster function on Wednesday, National Signing Day, and told the attendees, "I'm Ryan Grubb. I'm your new offensive coordinator." One source had said following Grubb's statement at Alabama that nothing had changed in regard to Seattle's pursuit of Grubb, noting Condata in regards to Grubb's statement at the booster event. If Condata's report is accurate, it means that Alabama essentially manipulated the system and misled players to keep anyone else from entering the transfer portal before the window closed. If any players decide they don't want to play for Alabama without Grubb as the offensive coordinator, they could still choose to transfer before the 2024 season, but they'll have to wait until the spring transfer window opens in April, which means they won't be able to go through spring practice with their new program. So, I include and highlight this story on the show because it is indicative of and shows the mess that college football currently is. There's nobody at the wheel. The emperor has no clothes. There's nobody ensuring that things are done in a way that is uniform and fair and controlled, it's unbridled chaos. And it's not good for the sport. It's not fair for the fans. And it isn't in the best interest of the student athletes. And I use that term in quotes, student athletes, because the student part of that term is being given less and less credence. And it's paid attention to almost never anymore. Allegedly, Kalen DeBoer in Alabama and this offensive coordinator, Ryan Grubb, and the Seattle Seahawks all were in cahoots together to wait on his hiring and to not make it official until after the transfer window had closed, to make sure that Alabama, who was already bleeding talent, who had lost top players to Ohio State and to other schools, to ensure that they didn't lose any more of their offensive pieces. And if this is true, this is at least shady, at least morally wrong, at least dishonest, if not cowardly, if not in violation of rules, if not requiring at least a slap on the wrist by the NCAA, which no longer has authority over major college football programs or conferences like the SEC. To mislead and lie to 18 to 21-year-olds so that they remain on your roster. It's amateur behavior. It shows a lack of confidence in your ability. And it shows a level of putting yourself first that unfortunately is second nature to too many college football programs and coaches. College football is quickly becoming little more than a minor league arm of the NFL. We're losing the parts of college football that we love the most. The on-field product is still great, but there are no rules here. There's no oversight here. The transfer portal is out of control. NIL, which has certainly had some merits and been beneficial to some student athletes, they should be able to profit from their own likeness and image. I don't think that a player should be suspended for an entire season because somebody wants to buy a football with their name on it. Okay. These schools are bringing in millions of dollars because of their football team. These players should be compensated. But there has to be some level of fairness. And what it's turned into is players transferring at the drop of a hat. What it's turned into is roster building that is akin to free agency in the NFL. Agents who have inserted themselves into these players' lives to make money and not at the best interest of the players. And now they want to consider a 14-team playoff before we even have a 12-team playoff. It's absurd. It's all about the almighty dollar. And it's a sad reality. Something needs to be done to rein this thing in. I know you can't put toothpaste back in the tube, but something must be done so that fairness is still a thing in college football. The actions of Kalen DeBoer and Ryan Grubb in Alabama, if true, are reputable and sad and silly. College football is on the precipice when it comes to super conferences and expanded playoffs and NIL and transfer portal of losing the things that we love the most. And you see these coaches who are veterans retiring. You see folks leaving head coaching jobs for coordinating positions at bigger schools or in the NFL. And they're all symptoms of the lack of leadership at the top. Maybe the answer is to have a commissioner of college football. Maybe the answer is for some of these commissioners of large conferences to get together and put together a framework for competitive fairness. But something has to be done. And if this is true, I certainly lose respect for Kalen DeBoer to mislead students like this, just to hold on to what you already have. Hey, just believe in yourself and your ability as a coach. Hey, just get out on the recruiting trail and make up for who you lost. Develop who you already have. This is not the way. Something must be done. Moving on from college football, let's check in with the NBA. And at the All-Star break, these are the standings. In the East, the Celtics have the number 1 seed, followed by the Cavaliers at 2, the Milwaukee Bucks at 3, New York Knicks at 4, the 76ers at 5, the Pacers at 6, the Orlando Magic at 7, the Miami Heat at 8, the Chicago Bulls at 9, and the Atlanta Hawks at 10th. In the West, it is the Timberwolves at 1, the Thunder 2nd, the Clippers 3rd, the Nuggets 4th, the New Orleans Pelicans 5th, Dallas Mavericks 6th, the Suns 7th, the Kings 8th, the Lakers 9th, and my Warriors at the 10th. The top scorers in the league are the injured Joel Embiid at 35.3 points a game, followed by Luka Doncic at 34.2, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander at 31.1 points a game, Giannis Antetokounmpo at 30.8, and Donovan Mitchell at 28.4 points a game. The top passers are Tyrese Halliburton with 11.7 assists a game, Trae Young at 10.9, Luka Doncic at 9.5, and the point god, Nikola Jokic, the dad bod god, at 8.9 assists, and James Harden at 8.4. The main story that I want to cover with the NBA this week is the All-Star Game, NBA All-Star Weekend. But first, I'll make passing reference to a couple of those All-Stars, the first of which is Kevin Durant. Kevin Durant recently, in warming up for a game, was screamed at by a couple of fans. Did you see this story? He was screamed at by a fan that called him the B word, called that man out of his name. And Kevin Durant heard them and came over and addressed them personally. And the man and woman had, I think, been having a couple of refreshments, a couple of pops. And their interaction was caught on camera. The man, when Kevin Durant comes over, his wife had yelled the B word. When Kevin Durant comes over, the man says, "I host a sports podcast." That was his defense. "I host a sports podcast. Hey, me too." And I got to give props to Kevin Durant because 8 out of 10 players would have had those fans thrown out. And when security came over and started to do so, Kevin Durant, who is known for being overly sensitive and having the world's thinnest skin, said no. Let them stay. Let them watch the game. Got to give big props to Kevin Durant. He handled that with class. He handled that as a man should. He addressed it one-on-one, and then he let it go, and he moved on, and he scored 30-plus points because that's who he is. The other All-Star I want to reference quickly is one of the greatest of all time, LeBron James, who is playing well in his 20th NBA season, who is an All-Star starter again, who is having his best season from three-point land, shooting 40% on the year, and is also hilarious. LeBron is hilarious because he played in the All-Star game. And then a few nights later, when they played the Warriors, sat out with an ankle injury. What are you doing, LeBron? What are you doing? LeBron James played in the All-Star game. He was fine. He looked like himself. And then they had a marquee matchup with the Warriors, who they're one spot ahead of in the standings. And all of a sudden, he's sitting out with an ankle injury. At All-Star Weekend, LeBron was asked about his impending retirement in the next few seasons, and if he planned to have a year in which he announced his retirement ahead of time and had a going away tour, or whether he would just announce it after the season was over. And his response was, "I don't know. I'm not sure which I would prefer. I've never been one who's good at receiving praise." Bruh, you nickname yourself the king. You do the little crown thing where you pantomime putting a crown on your own head. You hashtag yourself the kid from Akron. You're not one for receiving praise? LeBron James is not. He's hilarious. He's funny. It's been in the news the last couple of days that his son, Bronny, who plays at USC, has fallen off the draft boards. When it comes to projected draft for next year, he's no longer considered a player that will be drafted. And LeBron tweets, "Can you let the kid be a kid? Can you not worry about his draft grades and just let a kid be a kid?" Hey, LeBron, you're the one who tweeted that you were watching NBA basketball and that your son was better than a lot of the players on the floor. I'm just saying LeBron James is hilarious. What he tweets versus what he says versus how he acts, it is funny sometimes. It's a miracle that his son is even on the basketball court. He had that near-death experience. He had that medical situation. I'm glad that he's okay. I'm glad that Bronny is okay, and he's been playing some good basketball as of late. I hope that the kid makes it to the NBA. Even if he doesn't, it's okay. To play at USC is quite an accomplishment that most people never even achieve. But LeBron James is silly. He's a funny guy. To quote Kawhi Leonard, he's a silly guy. The main story when it comes to the NBA is All-Star Weekend, and more specifically the All-Star Game. And I'm not sure that you can even call it a game anymore, because it completely lacks any competition. The NBA players have done something that I can't believe that is even possible. They have made me uninterested and unmoved by the NBA All-Star Game. The All-Star Game of the professional league of my favorite sport, the sport that I find to be the most beautiful sport that there is. And they've completely sapped any interest I have in the game. I grew up watching the NBA All-Star Game, and it was a collection of the world's best players, the most talented people in the world at this sport, who took the opportunity to be competitive and to have that competitive fire against each other, to see where they stacked up, to show who was who, to see who would dominate, which conference would come out on top. And now it doesn't even qualify as a scrimmage. I've seen more competition in Harlem Globetrotter games and on the And One mixtape tour. These guys aren't even trying. To have a team score over 200 points in an All-Star game is an absolute indictment on every player that took the floor. And NBA Commissioner Adam Silver should do something to fix it. I don't think that the answer is paying players more. They already give money to the winning team. They already give the players an extended All-Star break so they have more time off. They've already made adjustments to schedules when it comes to things like back-to-back games. This is on the players. This is on the new generation of All-Stars. This is on them to find some way to actually muster the desire to play a competitive basketball game. At least let it be as competitive as the Rucker. At least let it be as competitive as some of the practices for the Olympic teams. At least put on a show for the fans. And seeing your favorite players go coast to coast with absolutely no one stepping in front of them and throwing it off the backboard 100 times in a game, taking shots from half court, it's not entertaining. It's not fun. And it doesn't matter anymore. The NBA All-Star Game used to be the most competitive of the professional sports. It used to be the most entertaining. And now it's worse than the flag football game that the NFL throws out there. It's lost its muster. The dunk contest has lost its muster. NBA All-Star Weekend has lost its muster because the players don't want to compete. And I don't understand for the life of me why. There's not a history of players getting injured and losing their season during the All-Star Game. They get more time off than ever before. Hey, show up and play basketball. It's what you get paid millions of dollars to do. We all look forward to watching the best in the world take each other on. Not to this glorified dunk contest. When the score is 55-50 at the end of the first quarter, when a team scores over 200 points in a game, it's less entertaining than me and my 6-year-old nephew playing NBA 2K on PlayStation 5. And it's unfortunate. It's got to be resolved, it's got to be fixed, and it starts with the players. LeBron James, if you want to add to your legacy, have a meeting with the players. I know you're going to play another year. Have a meeting with the players before the All-Star game and say, let's play a real game. Let's play a basketball game. Let's go head-to-head. You don't have to have intensity every second of the game, but at least try. At least give forth some effort. At least play a little bit of defense. At least try to win. Because what they put out there for the fans and on national television this All-Star game, this All-Star weekend was dull, boring, uninteresting, and sad. I'd rather go to the Y. I'd rather play a video game. I'd rather watch a pickup game of guys who care and who have a desire to be competitive. The All-Star game is a farce. It's a farce. And it's unfortunate. Moving on to the NFL, Super Bowl 58 was won by the Kansas City Chiefs, 25-22 over the San Francisco 49ers in overtime. Patrick Mahomes is your Super Bowl MVP. And it was a sloppy game. It was a game in which early on the 49ers looked like they were in control. They had opportunities to take advantage of Chiefs' mistakes and to really put themselves in position to win, but they could never quite get over the hump. They allowed Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs to stay in the game. They made some key mistakes. And the real story here is the greatness of Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes. Patrick Mahomes is now being tossed into the conversation of top 5 quarterbacks of all time, some already having him number 2, some even saying that he is better than Tom Brady. Slow your roll. Tom Brady has won 6 Super Bowls, played for 10. Pat Mahomes is not there yet. Mahomes has had the greatest start to any quarterback, no doubt. Pat Mahomes has already put himself in the pantheon with the all-time greats. He's a no-question first-bid Hall of Famer, one of the most talented and best players to ever play at the position. He's not number 1 yet. But this win, this Super Bowl win in Super Bowl 58 have propelled him and Andy Reid into these conversations. The level of winning that they have done in Kansas City is remarkable. They're both all-time greats, and this has changed the stratosphere that they're able to reach. If Andy Reid continues to coach, if he continues to have Pat Mahomes, I'm done betting against him. And it'll be interesting to see where they wind up on the all-time list. After the Super Bowl, the 49ers fired defensive coordinator Steve Wilks, which was a head-scratcher. The 49ers had a top 10 defense this year. Their defense was good enough to win. This has to be an example of things going on behind the scenes that we're not aware of and that we don't see. There has to be some incongruities there between players and coach. Otherwise, a move like this doesn't happen after 1 year when your team made the Super Bowl. And to a degree, I think that it's actually a little bit of scapegoating by head coach Kyle Shanahan. Because as a coordinator and as a head coach, he's made the Super Bowl, but he's never won it. He's never quite gotten over the hump. And hey, the defense played better. The defense limited Patrick Mahomes for most of that game. The defense put you in a position to win, but your side of the ball, coach, your offense couldn't quite get it done. Even though Brock Purdy played well. Even though you have more talent across the field. Pat Mahomes is playing with wide receivers that don't have hands. And you've got talent all over the field, and yet you scapegoat your defensive coordinator. We predicted the Chiefs would win. They did, in fact, win. It'll be interesting to see how both teams handle the offseason. The Chiefs have a couple of key players on the defensive side of the football that either have to be franchise tagged or re-signed at a big cost to the team. What will they do there? Will they bring in a top-tier wide receiver like free agent Mike Evans? And what will the 49ers do? How will they move forward? Will they remain one of the top teams in the NFL, or will they take a step back after not quite getting it done? We highlighted for you a couple of prop bets, fun things that you can bet on with the Super Bowl. We gave our take. The first was that Taylor Swift would appear on camera a total of 4 times, and she appeared 12. Taylor was everywhere. And for all of you haters out there, look. What would you rather see, a 300-pound guy with his bare chest painted, or Taylor Swift? I'll take Taylor. There also was a bet that Taylor Swift would announce her pregnancy. We said that that would not happen. It did not. There was a prop bet that Usher would wear sunglasses at some point during his performance. We said yes. In fact, he did not. And we said that the color of Gatorade that the winning coach would be doused in would be red. They poured purple Gatorade. They wasted a wonderful flavor by pouring it over Andy Reid's head. That man's bulbous head. We were 1 for 3 on our prop bets. Every year there's talk about Super Bowl commercials. The last couple of years have been pretty disappointing. I thought there were some fun ones this year. The Dung Kings commercial I thought was pretty funny, with all the guys from Boston, Tom Brady making an appearance, J-Lo on there, with her husband Ben Affleck. There was a good Popeye Wings commercial. The Uber Eats commercial about forgetting one thing to remember another was clever. Michael Cera and the CeraVe. Christopher Walken BMW commercial made me laugh. I liked the Paramount Plus commercial featuring Arnold from Hey Arnold, when they were going to throw him over the mountain. I thought that was a funny commercial. And the best of all to me was Arnold Schwarzenegger's State Farm commercial, where he couldn't pronounce the word neighbor. He kept saying neighbor. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there. That's terrible impersonation, but good commercial. I thought the commercials were better this year than they had been the last couple of years. And I thought that Arnold Schwarzenegger and Danny DeVito had the best commercial of all. What did you think of the Super Bowl? What do you think of the 49ers letting Steve Wilkes go? What did you think of Usher's halftime performance? What was the best commercial? Get at us and let us know. Email the show at intheshedwithwes@gmail.com. Find us on Twitter at intheshed4. I would love to hear from you about each of those things. That's all the news in the world for sports this week. Let's switch to this. The news in the world of the paranormal, where our first story this week takes us to outer space. Allegedly, NASA announces new super-Earth exoplanet orbits in habitable zone is only 137 light years away. Could a recently discovered super-Earth have the potential temperature and conditions to sustain life? The new exoplanet is situated fairly close to us, only 137 light years away, and orbits within a habitable zone, according to NASA. Astronomers say the planet, dubbed TOI 715b, because that's a totally normal thing to name a planet, is about 1.5 times the width of Earth and orbits a small reddish star. The same system also might harbor a second Earth-sized planet, which, if confirmed, would become the smallest habitable zone planet discovered by TESS, the Transitioning Exoplanet Survey satellite, so far, NASA said in a January 31st press release. Due to the super-Earth's distance from its parent star, it could be in a conservative habitable zone and harbor the right temperature for liquid water to form on its surface, which is essential to sustain life, according to the agency, which also added that several other factors would have to line up, of course. NASA said the measurements of the habitable zone, a narrower and potentially more robust definition than the broader optimistic habitable zone, put the newly discovered planet and possibly the smaller Earth-sized planet in prime position for its parent star. The agency said that because of the short distance the super-Earth orbits from its parent star, a red dwarf that's similar and cooler than our Earth's sun, a year for the planet is equal to 19 Earth days. The tighter orbit means the planets can be more easily detected and more frequently observed, according to NASA. Since its launch in 2018, TESS has been adding to astronomers' stockpile of habitable zone exoplanets such as TOI 715b that could be more closely scrutinized by NASA's James Webb Telescope, the agency said. The Webb Telescope is designed to not only detect exoplanets but explore the composition of their atmospheres, which could offer clues to the possible presence of life, NASA said. The Super-Earth research and discovery was led by Georgina Dransfield at the University of Birmingham in the UK, or as they say, Birmingham, and published in the monthly notices of the Royal Astronomical Society Journal in January. The findings mark another step forward in astronomers' mission to understand what atmospheric conditions are needed to sustain life and further explore the characteristics of exoplanets beyond our solar system, NASA said. So, NASA has allegedly discovered what they're calling an exoplanet that's only 137 light years away that might have the conditions necessary to sustain life. I don't believe you, NASA. All my flat earth listeners right now, or I don't believe this. I don't think. I thought this was an interesting story and one worth mentioning on the show. The James Webb Telescope is out here searching for planets that might be able to be inhabitable, and they're finding a lot of them. They're finding a lot of planets out there in our solar system that possibly, maybe be able to sustain life. And how does this affect what we're seeing in the news and all that we're seeing in the skies? All of these things that people are saying are displaying technology that is not of this world. We don't know. We don't know. May have no correlation at all, may be related, we don't know, but it's certainly interesting from a scientific standpoint that we're discovering other planets that are similar to Earth, and it might be able to sustain some type of life. An interesting discovery. A terrible name. I would have named the planet something a lot more interesting than a bunch of letters and some numbers, but hey, that's just me. What do you think of this discovery? Is this something worth noting? Is this important? Does this matter at all? Email the show at intheshedwithwes@gmail.com. Find us on X at intheshed4. Let us know what you think. For now, all we know is that there is another planet to add to the long list of planets that could have water, that could sustain life, that are close, but just so far away that we'll probably never know for sure. From outer space, we go to Oregon for our next story. Oregon health officials confirmed first human bubonic plague case since 2015. An Oregon resident has been infected with the state's first case of bubonic plague since 2015, health officials said last week. The resident was likely infected with plague by their symptomatic pet cat, Deschutes County Health Services said in a news release on Wednesday. All close contacts of the resident and their pet have been contacted and provided medication to prevent illness, Dr. Richard Fawcett, the Deschutes County health officer, said in the release without identifying the infected resident. And that's probably good, that they're not here just identifying this one man in Oregon who has contracted the bubonic plague from his cat. Because I think that might cause some friction with your neighbors. Or as Arnold Schwarzenegger would say, neighbors. I digress. Officials said there was little risk to the community since the case was identified and treated in the earlier stages of the disease. No additional cases of plague have emerged during the communicable disease investigation. The bubonic plague can progress into the more severe and difficult to treat septicemic plague, which is a bloodstream infection, and or pneumonic plague, which is a lung infection if not diagnosed early. The last cause of human plague in Oregon was reported in 2015, according to Oregon Health Authority. Humans typically begin to show symptoms of the plague within 2 to 8 days of exposure. Symptoms can include a sudden onset of fever, nausea, weakness, chills, muscle aches, and visibly swollen lymph nodes called buboes, which is also the scientific name for owls, for Eurasian eagle owls, like my boy Flacco. Rest in peace, Flacco. Humans can be infected through bites or contact with infected fleas of animals. In Central Oregon, officials warned that the most common animals to carry bubonic plague are squirrels and chipmunks, though they noted that mice and other rodents can also carry the disease. To prevent the spread of the plague, officials recommended that residents and pets avoid all contact with rodents and fleas, including sick, injured, or dead rodents. An advice that revolves around not coming in contact with fleas or rodents is very basic, very good advice. I'm no health expert, no disease expert, but I too would recommend. It's an official recommendation of this show, from my shed in Alabama, that you not come in contact, my people, my babies, my tools, with fleas or rodents of any kind. So, be honest. How many of you had the return of the Bubonic Plague on your 2024 bingo card? This is the world that we live in. Welcome to the new normal, my people. Diseases and viruses and apparently even plagues of dark ages returning to our streets here in America. This man got the bubonic plague from his cat. His cat that either had fleas or had eaten a rodent that was infected. Apparently scratched him, or had the flea jump from the cat onto the man and bite him, and he wound up with the bubonic plague. Which I didn't even know was a thing in 2024. I thought that the bubonic plague was gone forever. But it's back again. And it's a little bit scary. It's a little bit worrisome. I love how the officials in Oregon, these health officials, say, hey, there's nothing to worry about. I'm a little bit worried, okay? After 2020, if you tell me that somebody in Oregon has the bubonic plague, hey, I'm just a little bit worried. Because that could turn into an outbreak. They say it is not. They say it's been contained. They say there's nothing to worry about, but hey, I don't trust Google, and I'm starting to not trust health officials. And that's a sad commentary on the world we live in, but that's just where I'm at and how I feel. The bubonic plague has made a return in the great state of Oregon, where we have many listeners. And if you're one of them, wash your hands, stay away from fleas, and avoid rodents. That's my advice. From Oregon, we go to England for our next story. Paranormal investigators claim to have captured ghostly little girl on camera at site of mining disaster in England. Paranormal investigators Lindsay and Lee Steer claim to have captured a ghostly figure on camera during a live-streamed video recorded at Husker Pit in South Yorkshire, England on June 24th. Husker Pit is the site of an 1838 mining disaster that killed 26 children ages 7 to 17 when heavy rains caused a nearby stream to burst its banks and flood a shaft through which the children were trying to escape. The tragedy caused a public outcry that led to the 1842 Mines Act, which introduced some protections for child miners and prohibited any children under the age of 10 from working underground. And it took a disaster in 1842 to make a rule that children under the age of 10 should not be working underground. And even in 2024, I find that to be surprising. I digress. A memorial depicting two children working underground has since been built on the site and can be seen in the Steers live stream. According to the ghost hunters, the apparent apparition was not immediately visible during filming, and it was only later when someone showed the duo a screenshot featuring the childlike figure that they suspected something paranormal was at play. In the video, a ghostly white figure seems to float in front of a tree while Lee walks past without seeing it. It looks like a little girl standing there. I've captured a real-life spirit here. She looks like she's got a little white dress, and I can see a little face, mouth, and 2 eyes. It looks like she's elevated off the floor and she's got bare feet, Lindsay told Mir. It's really interesting because I think it's up near the day hole where the children sadly drowned. It's bizarre. I'd say it's possibly one of the children from the Husker Pit. It's heartbreaking to see. We didn't see the image until we got home and noticed a couple of people had seen it. It's mind-blowing. We ask our viewers to screenshot anything of interest because we're not particularly watching the screen all the time. Sometimes I wonder if people have doctored these screenshots, but I'm watching the video now and I can see it. I believe this is 100% a spirit of a child. Lee's a bit like, wow, even though he's skeptical. If we put that on Facebook and we weren't live, people would say that we've edited it. It's amazing. I'm sure if we took that to the locals at Silkstone, they'd be really impressed. She added that since it is believed that children's remains were washed and clothed in white after being recovered from the accident site, this explains why the ghostly little girl appears to be wearing a white dress. Lindsay also said that she always feels emotional when visiting the Husker Pit Memorial, from which she only lives 10 minutes away, and that she and Lee have picked up some interesting electromagnetic field readings while attempting to communicate with spirits at the site. Reactions to the video have been mixed, with some viewers expressing their belief that the ghostly little girl could authentically be paranormal, while others insist that the only thing caught on camera was pareidolia caused by sunlight reflecting off of a tree trunk. The Singular Fortean Society's photo and video analyst Emily Whalen thought that a technical glitch might be at least partially to blame. "Something weird is happening with the camera in this," she said. "The figure stays motionless in line with the tree the whole time. As you get later in the video, there's a weird pixelation that could be due to compression from being shared to social media, or something to do with the frame rate as it's being streamed. Maybe sunlight reflecting off of foliage is contributing to it, but something technological appears to be happening. Sometimes pixelation can happen in a specific area when the camera is trying to make sense of what's there." But she added she would need to have more information, such as the camera being used and the type of internet connection, to make a more definitive assessment. So, this is an interesting report out of England, that these two ghost hunters, this husband and wife, have visited a site where a tragic mining accident happened, in which 26 children tragically died. And while live streaming, there appears to be something that they think might be the spirit of one of the children who passed away. And watching the video and looking at the still shots, there is something clearly visible there. I encourage you to go look this up for yourself and let me know what you think, but there's something clearly visible there, and I can see where you could say that the contours of it appear in the likeness of a child. You can kind of make out some features that appear to be a face. I can see where they would deduct that there is a white dress being worn by this individual. It's certainly a creepy image. It's certainly interesting and questionable. I don't know that it is real. I don't know that I put a lot of stock in it. Like Emily Whalen said, a lot of times when you are live streaming, there's issues with buffering and with pixelation and with lighting that certainly can contribute to something like this showing up, that can explain certain anomalies. And yet we have an image at a place where children tragically lost their lives that happens to look a lot like a small child. What do you think? Have you seen this story? Have you seen these pictures out of England? Do you think that this shows the spirit of a little girl? Do you think it's something that can be explained away by technology? Is it an issue with lighting, with live streaming? Do you believe that these ghost hunters have captured the paranormal on camera? Is this an issue of evidence or of a glitch? What's really going on here? I'll let you decide. I'll let you be the judge, but I thought it was worth covering on the show. A worthwhile story nonetheless. From England, we go to Ohio for our last story this week. Inside the eerie mystery of the Circleville Letters that terrorized an Ohio town for nearly 20 years. Starting in the late 1970s, the anonymous Circleville Letters were sent to hundreds of residents, local businesses, government offices, and others, threatening to reveal the recipient's darkest secrets, or worse. "I've been observing your house," read the anonymous letter Mary Gillespie received in 1977, "and I know you have children. Stay away from Massey," the letter ordered. Somehow someone knew that Mary Gillespie was having an affair with Superintendent Gordon Massey, and Gillespie, a local bus driver, wasn't the only one receiving threatening letters. Across Circleville, Ohio, residents found anonymous letters in their mailboxes. So did elected officials and local papers. But what did the Circleville Letters want? And how far would the letter writer go? Not long after Mary Gillespie received a letter exposing her affair, her husband Ron began getting mail of his own. "Mr. Gillespie, your wife is seeing Gordon Massey," one of the Circleville Letters read. "You should catch them together and kill them both. He doesn't deserve to live." And that's scary. That is creepy. That's unnerving to receive a letter telling you that not only is your wife having an affair, but that you should do away with her and the other party. That's unnerving. The small town of Circleville, a half hour outside of Columbus, did not seem like a place where neighbors terrorized each other, yet the anonymous letters targeted multiple residents of the town of 12,000. The attacks on Mary Gillespie seemed the most personal. "Gillespie, you have 2 weeks and have done nothing," one letter to Ron read. Admit the truth and inform the school board. If not, I will broadcast it on CBS, posters, signs, and billboards until the truth comes out. Then, on an August evening in 1977, a phone rang at the Gillespie house. Ron picked up. Moments later, Gillespie stormed out to his truck with a .22 caliber revolver in hand. He told his daughter that he was going to confront the Circleville Letter writer. After he left, Gillespie's truck slid off the road and rammed into a tree, with Gillespie dying at the scene. The local coroner ruled Gillespie's death an accident, but Paul Freshour, Ron's brother-in-law, considered it murder. Before he died, did Ron Gillespie confront the person behind the Circleville Letters? Police determined that Gillespie's gun had been fired exactly once before his death. They never learned why Ron fired his weapon. Even after Ron Gillespie's death, the Circleville Letters continued to arrive, and they continued to target Mary Gillespie, now a widow, and Gordon Massey. Everyone knows what you have done, the letters taunted. If you don't believe us, just make them mad and find out for yourself. The attacks grew even more devious. Years after Ron's death in 1983, Mary Gillespie nearly fell into a fatal trap. One February day, Gillespie stopped her bus on the way to the school. Someone had put up a handmade sign on a nearby fence targeting her teenage daughter. Gillespie tried to pull down the sign, but it was tied to a box. After she brought the box home, Gillespie opened it to find a loaded gun inside. The gun gave authorities a break in the case. The Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation was able to recover a serial number from the weapon, and the gun belonged to Paul Freshour, the man married to Ron Gillespie's sister. Paul Freshour's wife, Karen Sue, confessed to police that her husband had written the Circleville Letters. The couple had been in the middle of a contentious divorce, and Karen Sue had evidence that she discovered letters hidden throughout their house. Freshour denied writing the letters. He claimed the gun had been stolen weeks earlier, yet a polygraph test declared Freshour a liar. Police arrested Freshour, and in 1984, a jury convicted him of attempted murder. During the trial, an expert witness testified that Freshour had written the Circleville Letters. Circleville residents hoped that with Freshour behind bars, the letters would stop, but they did not. Hundreds of letters swamped Circleville after Freshour's conviction. The prison warden declared that Freshour could not possibly have sent them. The prisoner had no access to pens or paper. Paul Freshour even received an anonymous letter himself from the Circleville writer while he was behind bars. Who hated Paul enough to try to get him in trouble? Freshour's lawyer asked the jury during his trial. If you read the divorce decree, who stands to profit financially if Paul is convicted and goes to prison? When the Circleville Letters continued, suspicion centered on ex-wife Karen Sue. She had reported her husband to the police. Did Karen Sue and her boyfriend, who matched a witness description from the booby trap crime scene, set up Paul Freshour? A decade passed and the Circleville Letters mystery only grew. In December 1993, when Unsolved Mysteries came to Circleville to investigate, the show also received an anonymous letter. Forget Circleville, Ohio. If you come to Ohio, you El Sickos will pay. It was signed the Circleville Writer. Speaking with Unsolved Mysteries, Paul Freshour begged the show to look deeper. I'd really like to see someone really look into this case on the letters, reopen the letter part of it, and get in and find out who wrote the letters. Then in 1994, the same year Freshour was released from prison on parole, the letters mysteriously stopped arriving in Circleville mailboxes. Who wrote the Circleville Letters? Paul Freshour went to his grave swearing that he had nothing to do with writing the letters, but a recent forensic examination revealed similarities between his handwriting and the anonymous letters. Decades after the final letters, the writer's identity has never been conclusively proved. The local sheriff's office has closed the case, and the mystery of the Circleville Letters may never be solved. So, the story of the Circleville Letters that continues to be a mystery to this day is one that I have wanted to cover on this show for a while. It's one full of intrigue that happens in Middle America, in a small Midwest town, where people started to receive threatening letters suggesting that if they did not comply with the letter writer's demands, that their deepest secrets would be made known to the public. Can you think of a more terrifying and disheartening situation to find yourself in than someone knowing what you have done in secret and threatening to expose you to everyone that you know? Your neighbors, your kids' teachers, political leaders, law enforcement. They thought they had this crime solved. that it was Paul Freshour. He was arrested, he was convicted, but the letters continued even while he was in jail. It's certainly possible that it could have been a copycat. It could have been somebody who was trying to put blame on somebody else in Paul Freshour's defense. He failed a polygraph, allegedly. Police seemed convinced, or at least satisfied with the fact that he was the guilty party. And yet he denied it till the day that he died. Yet he himself received a letter while in prison. Handwriting experts said that his handwriting was similar to those found in the letter, but there were suspects who were seen at the place where this booby trap was put up that did not match the description of Paul Freshour. Was it him? Was it his wife? Was it his ex-wife's boyfriend who was involved? Was it somebody who knew the family? Were there more than one party working together? To me, this is a creepy story, and it's one that I can't say has been solved. There seems to be a lot of circumstantial evidence indicating that Paul Freshour was in fact the Circleville Letter writer, but it's far from conclusive. There's a lot of questions that still need answering. And hey, if Robert Stack, of all people, if Robert Stack in Unsolved Mysteries can't get to the bottom of this, then who in the world can? Who can solve it? What was really going on here? What do you make of this story? What do you think of the Circleville Letters? Was it Paul Freshour? Did they have the right man behind bars? Was he guilty? Was it his ex-wife and her boyfriend? Or was it someone else altogether? We may never know, but I would love to know what you think. Email the show at intheshedwithwes@gmail.com. Find us on X at intheshed4. Give me your take on this story. I'd love to hear from you. That's all for this week. You don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. I can't either. It's back in the house and out of the shed for me. Thanks again for listening to episode 70. Make sure to subscribe, like, share, and review. It really does help. If you have any paranormal experiences, opinions about sports or politics that you'd like to share, you can email the show at intheshedwithwes@gmail.com. Again, that's intheshedwithwes@gmail.com. I might even read it on air. Join our membership club at patreon.com/intheshed4. Look for us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Pandora, the Good Pods app, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And make sure to follow us on X at InTheShed4. Subscribe to our YouTube channel at In the Shed with Wes Anderson 6670. We would sure appreciate it. Tune in again next week when we'll hit the headlines, talk some sports, and investigate together the Miami Mall monsters. This has been In the Shed with Wes Anderson, the best news show in the land covering politics, sports, and the paranormal. Have an adventurous and fulfilling weekend. I'll catch you tools later. Peace out, Boy Scout. Meemaw, we made it.
We sure did.